Hey there, are you taking the digital SAT this coming October 4th of 2025? If so, you probably want to know what you should study for and what might be on the test. Am I right? Luckily, you have come to the right video. My name is Kristina of Ivy Lounge Test Prep, and for the last 15 years, I have helped high schoolers all over the globe dramatically raise their SAT and ACT test scores and ultimately land spots at their dream colleges. So in this video, I'm going to go over 10 different predictions, 5 for reading, writing, and 5 for math that I think you're probably going to see on the test. First, I will go over what the question type is, any pointers I have, or any concepts you need to know to answer it. Then I'm going to present you with a question. You are going to get out a piece of paper, actually try the question, and write down your answer. Then at the end of the video, I am going to give you the answers to all 10 questions that we went over. Are you ready? So the first type of question that I think you might see on the October 4th SAT is what I call a meaning and context question. So it's a vocab question. It shows up in the beginning where the sentence completions are, right? At the beginning of each of the 2 different reading writing modules. But the difference is that it gives you a text and then it underlines a word. It's not a blank. It underlines a word and then it says, as used in the text, what does the word, whatever the word is, most nearly mean? And then it gives you 4 different vocab words. So here is my little trick for how you do this. For starters, you read the blurb that tells you any introductory information about the text, just so you get your bearings. Then you read the text. Then you are going to pick out a little snippet of the text that includes the underlined word that they're asking you about. Maybe it's a clause, maybe it's a line. It needs to be long enough that you get the context of it, but not so long that you forget it by the time you get to the end. Then this is my trick. You are going to read that little snippet that you identified 4 times in a row, in succession, one after the other, each time replacing it with what answer choice A is, then with what answer choice B is, what answer choice C is, then replacing it with what answer choice D is. Does that make sense? So you're going to read the little snippet 4 times in a row, replacing with the 4 different answer choices, and it should be pretty darn obvious to you what might make sense and what absolutely doesn't work and what you can cross out. So I'm going to share my screen and read it out loud for you, and then you will give question number 1 a try. Okay, so on your piece of paper, write down question number 1, and then you are going to give this question a try. So the following text is adapted from Ida B. Wells' 1970 autobiography, A Crusade for Justice. Mr. Watts is a reference to George Frederick Watts, an English painter. See. Manchester's art galleries are so arranged that the name of every picture is plainly seen, and one has no need of a catalog to pick out the name and the artist. This is a convenience to the general public, which other art galleries, which shall be nameless, might copy to advantage. To her treasure of art, Manchester has added Mr. Watts's latest picture, The Good Samaritan. And then it asks, as used in the text, what does the word arranged most nearly mean? Okay, so pause if you need to answer the question, and then answers will be at the end. Okay, so the second question that I predict you will see on your October 4th SAT is a traditional reading comp question. These show up after the vocab questions in each reading writing module. And what I specifically think you're going to see is an old poem. And it probably will not be asking you too much of a detail. They kind of just want to know that you basically understood what you read. So they're probably going to ask you something about the main idea or the purpose or some big picture, global question, just to see if you can understand what this old poem is saying. Okay, so As far as any tips of what to do, as always, with the general reading comp questions, you want to read the question stem first. That's the very last bit of text that you see before it gives you the four answer choices, right? And so that way you know what you're looking for before you then go and actually read the text. So that is the trick there. As far as old text in general or poems in general, I will say this for old texts, and that is a lot of times it's overwhelming to try and read the whole thing and then ask yourself, what did that mean? Instead, I would try to go every couple of lines or maybe to the end of each sentence and like stop and ask yourself, like, if I had to text that to my best friend, like, what would I say? Like in plain old English. Anything that you can do there will help your brain start to synthesize and pull apart the text, and it will make it much more digestible than if you waited to the end to then ask yourself what it meant. Okay. As far as poems, I highly recommend like not stopping at the end of every line, but like read it more fluidly and then like stop when there's actual punctuation. It just helps it maybe, become a little more accessible to you. Okay. So with those pointers in mind, I'm going to share my screen. This is going to be your question number 2, and then you are going to give it a try. Okay, for you, this is question number 2. The question stem, which we're reading first, which choice best states the main purpose of the text? The following text is from Georgia Douglas Johnson's 1922 poem, Benediction. Go forth, my son, winged by my heart's desire. Great reaches, yet unknown, await for your possession. I may not, if I would, retrace the way with you. My pilgrimage is through, but life is calling you. So pause if you need to, answer the question, and then answers will be at the end. Okay, so the third question type that I'm pretty darn sure you're going to see on the October 4th digital SAT is a claims question. Now, you always have these, but specifically, I think you are going to have one where you have to use data from an infographic, like a table or a chart or a something like that, to complete the text. Okay, so steps for this, so you are aware, is the first thing is you read the question stem, and that is the very, very last bit of text before you get to your four answer choices. You're going to see what it's asking you to do, right? It's usually to weaken, to strengthen, or to like complete an example or illustrate the text or illustrate the claim. So then once you know your task, then you're going to actually go and read the text to figure out what the claim is. Now, if it has infographics, then you're going to be like, okay, what is it asking me to do? Strengthen, weaken, or illustrate, or complete the text, as it were. And then you are then going to look at the data, okay? Briefly, you're going to look at like main things, title, what's on the axes, any sort of key, if there is one. You're going to see what is basically happening, but you're not going to go too in the weeds with the data because we got to go to our answer choices next. Now, when you are looking at a claims question that makes you look at infographics, you are looking for two things, right? One is the thing it said even true according to the infographic? That has to be like the foundation of a correct answer. If it's not even true, it could never be correct. So if it doesn't pass that, you cross it out. Now, the next thing is, okay, it is true, but does it do the thing that it wants you to do? Right? So, first of all, is it even relevant? And second of all, does it strengthen, does it weaken, or does it complete the text or illustrate the example? Okay. So, those are the basic steps for how you are going to go about this. Now, I'm going to give you an actual question for you to try. Okay, here you go. So, we read the question stem first. Which choice most effectively uses data from the table to complete the text? We read the text next. For a school project, a forestry student needs to recommend a maple tree that is native to North America and won't grow more than 60 feet in height. Based on the characteristics of 5 common maple trees, she has decided to select a, and now we're going to go here, maximum height of maple trees when fully grown. They have max height, native to North America, and tree type. Okay, so I'll pause here and you're going to answer this question. Write down your answer. This is your question number 3, and then we will reconvene and give answers at the end. Okay, now the fourth question that I'm pretty sure you're going to see on the SAT on October 4th is a standard English convention or a grammar question, but one that specifically needs you to understand the different ways, specifically the 5 different ways that you can put 2 complete clauses together appropriately using punctuation. So I'm going to tell you what that little rule is, and then you are going to try out a question. So if you have a complete clause, right, also known as an independent clause, also known as a clause or a group of words that could stand alone as its own sentence, there are only 5 ways that you can do this correctly with punctuation. Okay. The first way is you are simply going to use a period. You're going to do complete clause, period. Next complete clause, period. Literally, you're making them 2 separate sentences. That's the first way, most common way. Okay. Now, the second way is you are going to, instead of a period, use a semicolon. And that is the thing that looks like a comma on the bottom with a dot on top of it. So you would have a complete clause, then the semicolon, and then the next complete clause, but it's like lowercase, and then you end it with a period. That's the second way. The third way is going to be connecting them with a comma, but a comma alone will not do the job. You need a comma and a coordinating conjunction, or what we call a fanboys. So what do I mean by a fanboys? If you've never heard of this, there are 7 little words and it follows the acronym for fanboy. So for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. So those 7 words and those 7 words only. So you use a comma and then the appropriate one of those 7, not just anyone, but the one that is going to have the meaning that makes sense of the 2 different clauses. Okay. That is the third way, comma plus fanboy. Now, the fourth and the fifth ways are very similar, but they're different than the first 3. So if you have 2 complete clauses, and specifically, the second complete clause happens to explain, clarify, or answer a question posed by the first one, then you could use a colon in between them. Or you could use the 5th way, which is you could use a dash, right? Like a hyphen, but it's longer. Okay. So those are the 5 ways. You could use a period. You could use a semicolon. You could use a comma plus a fanboy. If the second explains, clarifies, or answers the first, you could use a colon. And again, if the second complete clause explains, clarifies, or answers, you could use a dash. So now I'm going to give you a question. This is your question number 4 so that you can try it out. Okay, which choice completes the text so it conforms with the conventions of standard English? And here's your text. Sociologist Todd Gitlin co-opted the term recombinant, normally used in reference to genetic engineering, to describe serialized television shows of the 1980s. Gitlin's use of the term referenced TV studios' practice of repackaging successful narrative formulas as new content in that era, even shows that varied only slightly from other shows still attracted sizable audiences. Okay, so you might need to do a little analysis of where the clauses are and are they, complete or dependent, and then figure out which punctuation to use. I'll give you a second to try that out. Remember, this is your question number 4. Answers will be at the end of the video. Okay, so our 5th prediction, which is another standard English convention prediction, is actually standard English convention or grammar, but also merged with your knowledge of transition words. And this is what I mean. I have noticed some questions pop up recently where it makes you have to determine, does the transition word go with the first clause or does it go with the second clause? And then according to that, then you might need to figure out how to appropriately punctuate in between them. Okay. So I want to share a little bit about transition words. So many of the transition words that we use, the ones that we like separate out with commas, like moreover, comma, however, comma, like those, additionally, comma. Technically speaking, they're adverbs. You don't need to know that, but you need to understand what it means when you see one of those. Okay. So when you see one of those, words like specifically, comma, like one of those transition words that you separate with commas, it acts like it's extra information. That's why they're separated out with commas, right? From the rest of the sentence. What that also means is that if they are the adverb type of transition word and they are treated like they're extra information and they're separated with commas, those transition words do not affect if the clause is complete or not, right? So they're usually with a complete clause or a complete sentence. And so then when you add moreover, comma at the beginning, it's still a complete sentence. Now, here's the thing. It does not matter where in the sentence that adverb-like transition word occurs. It could be at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end of that sentence. What you are going to analyze is the sentence it occurs in and its relationship to the sentence before it. Okay, so let me give you an example. Let's say I have two thoughts and I want to figure out, what type of transition word I want to use to connect them. Now, one thought is she was thirsty. The next thought is she refused to drink the water. Now, you and I both know that those two don't really make sense together. Like if someone's thirsty, they should drink the water, not refuse to drink the water. So I'm going to go with like a contradiction transition word, like a however, right? But now here is the beauty. I'm going to like say three different ways of putting the however in there. And you'll see it doesn't matter where the however occurs in that second sentence. It still is the appropriate word that compares the two sentences. Okay. Let me show you what I mean. She was thirsty. However, she didn't drink the water, right? I used however at the beginning. It's very clear, though, that I am comparing these two ideas and that they contradict. Okay. Second way. She was thirsty. She did not, however, drink the water. So I use the transition word in the middle of that second sentence, but it's still very clear that I am comparing the second with the first. But this is the one a lot of people don't get. So listen to this. She was thirsty. She did not drink the water, comma, however. It does not matter that the however was the very, very last thing of this sentence. Because it was one of those transition words that acts like extra information, it still means that I need to compare this sentence that it occurs in with the sentence before. I would not be comparing this sentence with the one after, even though the word however is at the very end and in between this sentence and whatever comes later. So that is the little tidbit that you need to know, even though like it's very nuanced. But I promise you, like I've been seeing these crop up where you have to make the determination like, oh, does the however go with this or does it go with this? And if you use that little rule that I just showed you, then you can figure it out. Okay, so let me give you a question and then you can try it out on your own. And this is going to be your question number 5. Okay, so on your paper or your notes, write down question number 5. And here is the sentence. Journalists have dubbed Gil Scott-Heron the godfather of rap, a title that has appeared in hundreds of articles about him since the 1990s. Scott-Heron himself resisted the godfather nickname, however, feeling that it didn't encapsulate his devotion to the broader African-American blues music tradition, as well as bluesologist, the moniker he preferred. So I cruise through it, you read it, and figure out where the punctuation goes and where the however goes. Okay, so those were the first 5 predictions. They were all reading, writing predictions. And we're going to move on to math. But before we do, Tell me how it went for you so far, or how you think it went for you. Just tell me in the comments below. I want to know. While you're at it, hit those like and subscribe buttons. And then that way you'll always be the first to know each week when I drop the latest video in SAT, ACT, or college applications, tips, tricks, updates, and hacks. Okay, so now let's move on to our sixth prediction and our first math prediction for the October 2025 SAT. So I know they're going to ask you about systems of linear equations because they always do. But specifically, I think they're going to have a system of linear equations where instead of one of the coefficients or numbers before one of the variables, x or y, they're going to give you a constant like k or m or something and ask you, okay, what does this constant need to be? Like, what number does it need to be for the system to have no solution? So this is what you need to know to answer this question. If a system has no solution, what is true about those two lines? They must be parallel, right? Like literally two lines that never cross. Hence, they never cross, so there's no solution. So if you have two parallel lines, what is true about the equation of those two lines? Right, they have the same slope. They must have the same slope because as this one is trying to catch up to the other line, this one is, at the same rate. So it's staying ahead and they never cross. But what also must be true is that they must have different, it could be like millions of things, but just so long as they're different y-intercept. So like basically one got a head start, so it's ahead and it stays ahead, right? So when you are looking at a question like this, if you want to have no solution, that means they're parallel. That means make the slopes the same. Do what you need to do. Maybe that's solve it into y equals mx plus b formula. Maybe if you do that, you will easily see what the slope is. That's one way to do it. In my digital SAT math guide, I have a bunch of really cool tricks about this that are shortcuts, but I don't want to bore you with them here because it's outside of the scope of this video. But make the slopes be the same. Okay. So I'm going to give you a question so you can try it yourself. This is going to be your question number 6 on the piece of paper you're writing this down on. Okay, here we have 4x minus 9y equals 9y plus 5, and then hy equals 2 plus 4x. In the given system of equations, h is a constant. If the system has no solution, what is the value of h? So pause if you need to, work this out, write your answer down, and then we'll do answers at the end of the video. So the 7th prediction for the October 4th SAT and the second of my math predictions is that I think you'll have to know what standard deviation means. You won't have to find out how to calculate it, but you will need to understand the basics of like, do these things have the same standard deviation? Which one has a larger standard deviation? So let me just tell you the quick down and dirty of kind of what it means. I'm not going into super detail because you don't need to know super detail for the digital SAT, but the basics, the least you need to know to get this type of question right. Okay, so when we have data, if we have, say, a bell curve, what a standard deviation basically means is how far from the mean, right? That's this area in the center, usually speaking, if it's a standard curve. How far from the middle, the mean, do we have to stray, that means up or down, in order to catch roughly 2/3 of the data points, right? So it's technically like 68 point, I want to say it's 2% is one standard deviation away. So above and below, right? How big does your net have to be to capture roughly 2/3, right? So that's what it means. There are many ways to use it. You don't need to know that for this test, but you do need to know what that one little fact might mean in practice. So let's say everyone in a class, in your history class, let's say, scores a 90 on a test, literally 90, 90, 90, 90. Everyone scores a 90. Well, the average would just be 90. So your standard deviation would be 0 because you wouldn't have to stray anywhere from that middle, from that average mean to capture roughly 2/3 of the data points. Now, however, what if instead the average was still 90, but we had like some people with hundreds and then people with 80s and even maybe some 70s, right? So like somehow there's the correct number of 70s and 80s and people getting 100 so that it still averages to 90. But do you see how those are very spread out? So standard deviation would be, again, you don't have to figure out how it would be calculated, but you would just need to know that when they're spread out like that, you would have, you'd have to stray from 90 in both directions to capture some of those data points, right? So that is what I'm going to leave you with. See if that is enough for you to do it in practice on this question. So this is going to be your question number 7 on your piece of paper. Okay. So each of the dot plots shown represent the number of glue sticks brought in by each student for 2 classes, Class A and Class B. Which statement best compares the standard deviations of the numbers of glue sticks brought in by each student for these 2 classes? Okay, try it out yourself. This is your question number 7, answers at the end. Okay, on to prediction number 8 and my third math prediction. I think you might have to do the Pythagorean theorem, yes, as easy and basic as that is, for one of the questions on the test. I don't know. I feel it's due. Okay, so if you forgot what that is, when you have a right triangle, meaning a triangle with a 90-degree angle, right? You're going to have 2 legs, and then you're going to have a hypotenuse. The hypotenuse we call C, the 2 legs we call A and B. All the Pythagorean theorem says is if you want to find any of the missing lengths, right, you do a squared plus b squared equals c squared, or leg squared plus the other leg squared equals the length of the hypotenuse squared, right? Maybe they don't use A, B, and C per se. So it's a simple formula you have learned a long time ago. Fun fact though, it's not just that if you have a right triangle, you can do Pythagoras theorem. It's that if you have a right triangle, you must be able to do the Pythagorean theorem. If you try it and the numbers like don't equal the c squared, then it's not a right triangle. Okay. So with that in mind, I'm going to give you a little sample question for you to try out. So this is your question number 8 on your sheet of paper. Okay. Your question 8. One leg of a right triangle has a length of 43.2 millimeters. The hypotenuse of the triangle has a length of 196.8 millimeters. What's the length of the other leg of the triangle in millimeters? Pause, work it out, write your answer down, and answers will be at the end of the video. Okay, so 9th prediction and the 4th math prediction I have for you for the October test is that I think you will need to understand how to utilize, find, make sense of the vertex of a parabola. So the vertex of a parabola is going to be the point that is either the very minimum if it's an upward facing parabola, or if it's a downward facing parabola, it will be the point that is the very maximum. Now, if you have your quadratic equation written out in standard form, that's where it's like ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So maybe it's like 2x squared plus 5x minus 7, something like that, right? Those coefficients in front of each term are your a, your b, and your c. So now here is the cool thing. If you want to find the vertex, right, that point, there's 2 parts to it. Every point has an x and a y coordinate. The x coordinate is where the maximum or the minimum happens, right? The y coordinate is, in this case, the minimum, or is, in this case, the maximum. Does that make sense? So the x is where it happens. The y value itself is the actual max or min that they might be asking you about. Now, here is how you find it. When you've got a parabola and you've got the equation for it and it's written in that standard form, then the x value is going to be negative b over 2a. So literally negative the coefficient before the x term divided by 2 times the coefficient in front of the x squared term. So that is your x value. That is where the max or min happens. Now, once you know that and you know the actual number, now you can plug it into the equation itself. And whatever answer you get, that is the y value. So that will actually be the minimum or be the maximum. Does that make sense? So I'm going to give you a question so you can try that on your own. And again, that is going to be your question number 9. And admittedly, this one does have a little bit of trick to it. So you're going to have to do a little function stuff before you can then use the trick that I told you, but it still applies. So we have f of x equals 4x squared plus 64x plus 262. The function g is defined by g of x equals f of x plus 5. For what value of x does g of x reach its minimum? I'll give you a second, try it out, write down your answer, and then we will grade them at the end. The 10th prediction that I think you're going to see on October's SAT in a few weeks is going to be an identifying the equivalent expression question. Okay, so it's going to involve your ability to manipulate polynomials, maybe a rational expression. And what this might involve is you might need to, FOIL out various factors, distribute across parentheses, mind your negatives if you see any. Then you're going to need to maybe add like terms, or maybe you need to then like add fractions that have the polynomial on top and a polynomial on bottom. But in order to even add or subtract them, you have to make them have the same denominator, right? So you're basically big manipulation of like what we call these rational expressions or these fractions with polynomials on top and on bottom. And then after you have simplified, then maybe you factor them again. Maybe some factors cancel out on top and on bottom. So you're going to need to simplify as best you can and manipulate all of these cool little polynomials and rational expressions. So let me give you an example so you can try this out. Okay. And this is your question number 10. So here you go. It says which expression is equivalent to first fraction y plus 12 over x minus 8, then plus y times the quantity x minus 8 over x squared y minus 8xy. So pause this, figure it out, write your answer down, and next we are going to do the answer keys for all of them. Okay, so how do you think you did on those 10 questions? Okay, so here are the answers for the reading, writing questions. So the first one is A. Question number 2 is D. Question number 3 is C. Question number 4 is B as in boy. Question number 5 is C. Now moving on to the math questions. So question number 6 is D as in dog. Question 7, B as in boy. Question 8 is C. Question 9 is A. And then question 10 is C. So how'd you do? Let me know in the comments. Okay, so I hope this was super helpful for you with some 10 different predictions and last minute tips and tricks and a little study sesh for you and a little bit of practice at the same time. So if you want even more help before the October 4th digital SAT, I actually have a free video for you, and it's called The 3 Biggest Mistakes to Avoid on the Digital SAT's Reading and Writing section and How to Fix Them. So check it out in the link below. Good luck on your test.